what do you have to say to the people who are listening, who hear about this Eucharistic revival, maybe for the first time, and they say, okay, that sounds great. What can little old me do wherever I am in my own place? What do you encourage them to do? Go to the website, sign up, get the updates. What else?
Yes, definitely do that. But first, look for ways to grow in your own prayer life and to renew the love of the Eucharist in your own heart. And all of us can do this, right? Whether that's a weekly holy hour in adoration chapel someplace, whether that's going to daily mass, maybe one extra day a week, whether that's becoming an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion and bringing communion to the sick and those who are homebound. There are so many ways that we can renew our own relationship, and then also our study, to like deeply understand this mystery. The Eucharist is a mystery that we can spend our whole life studying, and should. And it's going to always pay back in very practical ways if we spend that time and study. And then the third thing is just to think in your own life and pray in your own life and ask, where can I get involved? So maybe I can, gather a little group of people at my parish who would help in the parish year and offer to help my priest, say, hey, I know the Eucharistic Revival is going on. I'd like to help you implement this in the parish, and I'll do whatever you want. That's always the best kind of help to offer a priest. I'll do whatever you want. Because sometimes that's what keeps a priest from getting something done, is he just doesn't have people to help him, So looking for ways to do that. But it also can be just, I'm going to form a little small group myself, and we're going to study something on the Eucharist, or I'm going to invite a way to kind of share with people. I encourage this all the time, that we need to learn ways to form groups around natural things that we're all doing. Up here in northern Minnesota, it's the hockey moms. We don't have soccer moms, we have hockey moms. But, so they're at the hockey arena watching their kids play hockey. They can use that time to develop friendship, to begin to share faith, even to do some kind of small group study. To be able to do that, I've seen it done very effectively, where people who maybe wouldn't come to the church for something, they'll join a group like that because for friendship's sake at the coffee shop, or when other things are going on. And there's ways to begin to conscientiously learn to share my faith there. And that sounds intimidating. It sounds really hard, but it's actually not. And that's really where, different small group initiatives like we're going to have in the revival will help train people to that. It's really as simple as saying, hey, do you want to join this little group, and we're going to meet for coffee and talk? And it sounds hard, but it's not.
Yeah, very, very helpful. One of the great fallacies, I think, around the church and around the Eucharist is that it's something other. It's something separated from everyday happenings of our lives. And
yeah,
one of the crises of our culture is around relationship. And I often talk about the idea that it is impossible for us to have a better relationship with other people than our relationship with God. And the primacy of our relationship with God. Our relationship with God leads our other relationships. How do you see the Eucharistic revival helping people grow and heal and develop relationships in a human sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. Relationships develop because of vulnerability. And that vulnerability, you're exactly right, is required with God in order to be able to develop a relationship with him. And then the deeper vulnerability I have with God, the deeper vulnerability I can have with others. It's also the other way though, right? So like when I develop real Christian friendships and I begin to share, that also helps me be vulnerable with God, and it helps me grow in relationship with God. So they're mutually helping things. This is one of the reasons why we're really pushing small groups. And I'm a believer that every Christian should have some kind of small group of friends that that help them to live the Christian life well. So people with whom they're vulnerable and people with whom they share, these are my real struggles to live the Christian life, where they can get support, encouragement, advice. And it's usually more support and encouragement than advice, because that's usually what I need, is good friends who will stand with me in difficult spots. And they'll push me into the Lord, And so the Eucharist, what it wants to do is it wants to make us one body. This is the reality of the Eucharist. It actually forms us into Christ's body. And that means loving each other in a certain way. This is very clear in St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, right? When he writes to the Corinthians about the Eucharist, he says it's a scandal because you're not sharing food with each other. You're treating the poor people worse than the rich people, but you're all coming to communion. He says that's a scandal. And that's where Yvette says, right, that you're eating and drinking condemnation upon yourself because you're not actually living in real human relationships as the body of Christ. And so these things are essentially connected. And that's a danger of the Eucharistic revival, right? That we would only focus on this kind of spiritual understanding and insight. That's why I say it's not just about coming to understand the real presence. It's about an encounter with Jesus in the Eucharist. Because that encounter with Jesus, when I realize my sins are forgiven, when I realize that he loves me in my profound weakness, that's what's going to allow me to love my brothers and sisters in their profound weakness. And then together we'll be able to be the body of Christ that we're called to be for the sake of the world. You know, one of the things I discovered in this revival came from Pope Leo XIII, who people don't know much about, but he was the Pope at the turn of the 20th century. He died in 1903, and in 1902, he wrote probably his last most important encyclical letter on the Eucharist. And this is the same Pope, by the way, remember, who had this kind of sense that the 20th century would have a real influence of the enemy, the devil. And so he commanded that the St. Michael prayer be prayed after every Mass in the church at the beginning of the 20th century. And that lasted for many, many years. And he was right. Looking back in the 20th century, we could say, 2 world wars, the devil was very active. But he says, I could focus on a lot of things here at the end of my life. But he said, I think the most important thing is to focus on the Eucharist, because the Eucharist is the spiritual heart of the church. And if we're strengthened in our relationship with the Eucharist, the church will be stronger to be able to be who she is supposed to be in the world today. And I really think that's what we're called to do. We're being called to be strengthened as the church in our relationship with the Eucharist so that we can stand against all of the struggles that will happen. And that's not just a spiritual relationship, me and God, that's the church is strengthened in our relationship with each other to support each other in real relationship as we therefore able to witness to the world.